Good evening. Apologies for starting late. I was trying to go via Zoom actually to live stream, so goodness knows what's going to happen. But anyway, I am here now and I am talking about tonight's topic, which is really about whether you should consider freezing your eggs. So what is egg freezing? Well, and how am I going to talk about it? So I'm going to explain a little bit about it. Good evening, Aid. And I think it's just a subject that probably in these current climes when there's so much uncertainty, hi there, Suzanne, is probably something that, younger women are really wondering there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. And I suppose even more than ever, none of us know what the future is going to bring, and certainly if you're a woman, a single woman, then you might be wondering, if you haven't found your Romeo, how that's going to happen in the current climate, or even if you have met someone, they might not be the right person for you. So there are lots of reasons, and obviously I work in mainstream medicine. I'm a registered nurse and I work in a fertility clinic in theatre and recovery, but also I've been a homeopath, a registered homeopath for 20 years. So as you'll see with some of my posts and some of my previous lives when I've talked about things like endometriosis and PCOS, I do touch on what we know, that sort of the box I always talk about, but we try and think outside the box when we work holistically. So tonight I'm not specifically going to go through lots of different remedies because I have covered that in lots of individual lives that I've done. So please refer, or what I might do is link the lives that come up to, if you're somebody who suffers with polycystic ovary syndrome or somebody who suffers with endometriosis, they may be very useful lives for you. Hi there, Shelley. So tonight really we're talking about egg freezing. So it's a method really that women can use to preserve their fertility so that they can choose and try and have children at a later date. So it's one way by egg freezing that you can preserve it so that you can have a family in the future. And as I said, what does it involve? Well, it involves collecting a lady's eggs, a woman's eggs. It involves freezing them, and I'm going to talk a little about how they do that, and thawing them later on so that they can be used in fertility treatment. Okay, so a woman's chances of conceiving kind of vary considerably with age, but it's interesting because if I was to look at it, and I do with many people that I see, I kind of look at it very differently to mainstream medicine. So if you follow my posts or my Instagram, you'll see that I did put a post about statistics, and you will see the graph, and it kind of shows that over a period of time with age, fertility kind of does this sort of crashing thing. But when I look at that with my holistic, through my holistic glasses, you could say, then I just think, no, anything is possible. And certainly when I work with ladies in rapid transformational therapy and homeopathy, I've worked with a lot of women where we've maybe changed and balanced their hormones, changed and balanced their periods, changed and really addressed the lining of their uterus. And, potentially we have changed and altered the quality of their eggs too, by using natural remedies, and then also by using RTT, which is a form of hypnosis, which gets to the root of the cause and the reason, really, for infertility. So it's a really exciting way of looking at things. And in fact, actually, only last week I was talking to one of the doctors at the clinic where I work in theatre, and saying that, I always look at holistic health as a three-legged stool, and I've often used that kind of metaphor. So if you think about it, the work that we do with IVF and ICSI and fertility is really looking at the physical side, and we can do that. So egg freezing is looking at how you can preserve longevity and keep your eggs, for future use. But then we look at the emotional body and the energetic body. So, if these aren't right, if emotionally things aren't right with you you're going through a lot or under a lot of stress and strain, or energetically it's the same, that you might be very fatigued because of different circumstances. If all these three legs in your kind of stool, your health stool, are not sitting balanced, you know, it is likely that things won't work for you. Things won't flow, and certainly treatment may not be successful if you're going down the fertility route. So what I try and do alongside, and there's definitely room for collaboration of mainstream treatments alongside homeopathy, which I've worked very, very successfully with people who've done a lot of mainstream interventions by using fabulous IVF treatment, and it has worked, and we've been able to really exacerbate even stimulation treatments that I've had. So without digressing, going back to the egg freezing, you know, a woman's chances of conceiving, as I say, statistically, if we looked at that, would fall as a woman gets older because of the quality and the number of her egg strands. So that egg reserve is the phrase that we use. So egg freezing can really be an attempt to preserve their fertility, and by freezing the eggs when a woman, you know, is young and the eggs are presumably at, you know, that their best quality, for use at a later time. So deciding when or whether to freeze your eggs, deciding, you know, it's a balancing act, and it's a very personal thing. The age at which you sort of freeze your eggs is kind of the key to really where your chances of eventually having a baby could be. And it's interesting because today I was also having a conversation about this during a procedure, and, you know, medically, doctors would say that the best time to do your egg freezing is when you're in your 20s and early 30s, because the quality of your eggs declining after the age of 35. Although I would say to that, if anybody's there going, oh, you know, homeopathically, holistically, I would say there are still things that we can do to tweak your emotional, energetic body to complement you going down an IVF route, as I've said. So is egg freezing the right thing, you know, for an individual? So why might you consider freezing your eggs? Okay, so commonly, and we do see it where I am, people who have got an underlying or presenting a diagnosis of a medical condition that will affect their fertility, so something like cancer if they're needing chemotherapy, that would be a reason to have your eggs collected prior to treatment. Okay, if you are worried about your fertility declining, you know, what I'd say is social freezing. So you think, well, I haven't met, you know, the person who seems right to share bringing up child with me now, but I would like to do this now because maybe when I do meet that person in my 30s, maybe they might have fertility problems. So, you know, and you just don't know that until you're going. So if you had your eggs frozen, then you met somebody and you decided it was the right time to start a family, and then you try to do it naturally, and maybe after a year, 2 years, it hasn't happened, and then you go through investigations, and then you're already kind of ahead on your journey because you've already preserved your eggs. So it's a really good option to think about, sometimes called elective freezing, sometimes called social freezing, but it would certainly increase your chances of it being successful if, say, you met, you know, Mr. Romeo with a man, or, you know, or other partner. Doesn't have to be heterosexual, it can be same sex, and you think this is the right person that I want to bring up my children with, yeah, then it's a good opportunity to do it. People are also maybe serving in the armed forces or who are at risk of injury. You know, who knows what's happening, might be a good idea to say, yes, I will do it now. As I said, it's not just heterosexual couples, it's, you know, it can be same-sex couples, or people that are going through transgendering, transitioning, if you're a female, transitioning to a male, and you want to preserve your fertility before you start hormone therapy or have reconstructive surgery. You know, what an amazing opportunity to do that. So So, all of these things can affect your fertility. Obviously, if you're changing your gender, yes. And also, if you don't want to have, leftover embryos after IVF for ethical reasons, it's another way that you could minimise that if you felt strongly about it. So what does freezing your eggs actually involve? Well, first of all, you would need to be tested for any infectious diseases like IVF or hepatitis, not because it has any bearing on your eggs getting collected, but it's simply that, when your eggs are collected and the samples are stored alongside, it would prevent any sort of risk of contamination with other samples. So it doesn't prevent them being collected, it just means that there wouldn't be any risk of infection or cross-contamination with other ones. Then you'll start the in vitro IVF process, which usually takes 2 or 3 weeks to complete, and you would take some drugs or protocol stimulate your eggs to get them into the best number and the best quality. And when they're ready, and that they'll know through scanning you at different stages to see how your follicles are developing, then they'll be collected, under sedation, perhaps. So at this point, instead of mixing the eggs with the sperm, which is conventional IVF, a cryoprotectant or a freezing solution will be added to protect the eggs, and the eggs will either be frozen by cooling them really slowly or by vitrification, which is a form of really fast freezing, and it is really fast. I was asking one of the embryologists at work, and it is, because they're stored in tanks of liquid nitrogen. So if you've ever seen liquid nitrogen at work, it is literally instantaneous. So yes, and also, interestingly enough, if you look at the website, the HEFA, the Human Embryology and Fertilisation website, some of the statistics show that vitrification is more successful than the slower cooling method. Okay, so that's where that came from, that statistic I got from the HEFA website, which is a really useful website to go to for any information really around fertility or fertility treatment or egg freezing. All those questions and all the information is up there. So most women would maybe say have an average of about 15 eggs collected, but that would depending on your age and your ovarian reserves. So in other words, whether you had good numbers or low numbers of eggs. When you want to use them, the eggs will then get thawed, and those eggs that have survived intact would then be injected with your partner's sperm, or maybe a donor sperm. Now I'm going to be doing a live about egg donation and sperm donation in the next few weeks, so I'm not going to go too much into that, but it's just, it's there, isn't it? So cost of egg freezing, well, an average cost of having your eggs collected, as I said, it's not normally available on the NHS unless that you have any of the reasons that I've cited before. So if it was maybe pre-chemotherapy or some other things, or you had maybe very early onset menopausal symptoms. So it very much depends on area. I hate to use that phrase postcode lottery, but it also depends on your clinical commissioning group as well. But on average, I would say the cost is anywhere between 3,500 and storage costs that are then added on. So, it's important to get all of part of it, so not just the collection, but the storage costs, all kind of factored into your budget really, so that there's no unexplained extras. Thawing eggs and transferring them to the womb might be a kind of add-on additional cost. So, it can all add up. Hi there. So it's definitely worth sort of sitting down and doing your homework and maybe ringing round and getting lots of different options and seeing, as it were, literally shopping around really, and also read reviews. If you go to the HEFA website too, they have a list of all accredited clinics in the UK, so that's a really good starting place if you're thinking, well, where would I go? I mean, obviously there's lots that you can see, there's lots of different groups on social media, but sometimes it's good to go to a governing body and know where you're going. So kind of key facts: NHS funding for fertility treatment really varies depending on where you live, and you might need to meet certain criteria to be eligible. And you might not always be able to choose your clinic if you are NHS funded. Okay, so there can be a big difference within lots of the private sector, so it's definitely worth taking your time, doing your homework and shopping around and, seeing what's going on. So kind of interestingly enough, there's lots of different people, as I mentioned before, about this issue over the statistics, but I would like to say, and I think I did in my post, Disraeli once said, lies, damn lies and statistics. And certainly if I was talking to anyone that I work with in my holistic practice, I would definitely say anything is possible. It truly is. I know from the patients that I've served, and certainly with my colleagues in the RTT world, and with Marissa Peer. If any of you not sure who Marissa Peer is, Google on YouTube, and there are some amazing big evidential body of live therapies that she's done herself. And certainly I was trained by her alongside other therapists. And certainly it definitely is there. And as a homeopath of 20 years, I can definitely say, yes, I've definitely enhanced people's ability to ovulate, certainly regulated their menstrual cycles, and given them much more comfortable monthly cycles, and improved the quality of the lining, and as I said, improved the quality of their eggs, either naturally or alongside fertility treatment. So how safe is it? Well, in egg freezing in terms, we're going back to it, IVF is mostly very safe. Some women do find the stimulation can be a bit of a rough ride, really. Some ladies, it doesn't seem to really bother them. Some ladies can feel very bloated and really quite unwell, but it can be mild. And some women can get what's known as ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which is rare, but it can happen. And it's something that, once you're familiar with what the symptoms might be, then it can be easily corrected. So certainly it's something that we would advise lots of people, certainly post egg collection when I'm in recovery, certainly go through a lot of information with people about that, and they go back very well prepared with a nice little list of what do's and don'ts and what to look out for. Okay, how successful is egg freezing? Well, it's a rapidly changing field, is egg freezing. So if you do decide to freeze your eggs, it's really important that you choose a clinic that has plenty of experience in that, and ask to see their most recent kind of success rates for women of your age. I think that's a really useful thing, especially if you're under 35. Using these frozen eggs in treatment will give you a higher chance of success compared to trying to conceive naturally if you don't meet, the person that you think is going to be the person that you want to settle down with and raise a family with. So certainly if you freeze your eggs earlier, you're kind of giving yourself a higher percentage chance. And I think if you go on to the HIFA website, they bring up a little scenario based on if you collected your eggs at 28 and frozen them, and then you met a partner and then were unable to conceive naturally, and then we're looking at IVF treatment. By the time you've probably been referred and applied for funding, you might be looking at maybe another 2 years on, 3 years on, and so that can knock you over. So it's definitely conversations to have, and it's definitely food for thought in an ever-changing kind of world where, we women, we should feel that we are very much in charge of our own bodies, and we know our own minds. And also, if you don't meet, somebody, you might still think, well, I'm more than capable, and I want to become a mother. And and make that decision for yourself, and you can use donor sperm. So there are all sorts of opportunities that are available, and I think it's very empowering for women, to explore all these opportunities. I certainly know people that have gone on and they haven't maybe met somebody who they thought would be a good person to raise a family with, and so they have used donor sperm, and and it has been a wonderful thing, and it's gone on and they've had IVF and it's been very successful, and they've got a beautiful child now, so many years on. So it's good to have these possibilities there. Some women might decide to freeze their eggs later on, firstly because when you're younger, when you freeze your eggs, you might think, well, I'm less likely to use them, because you might conceive naturally. So if you did have your eggs frozen and then you did meet Mr. Right, or in same-sex couples, somebody that you wanted to have a family with, then you might think, oh, you might use donor sperm and conceive quite easily. It might not be an issue. Or if you have got a heterosexual partner, then you might conceive quite easily. So going back into the legalities a bit again, the law says that you can store your eggs for a maximum of 10 years. There are some exceptional circumstances, I won't go into that, but that is usually the norm, is 10 years. So say if you froze your eggs when you were 20, you might only be able to use them up until then, obviously you're 30, and you might not be ready to think, well, actually, no, I don't want to start thinking about having a family now. I'd rather wait a little bit later. So it's worth getting the kind of timing right as to when, if you are under 30, when would be a good time to do it, just so that it all fits in and you've not run out of your 10-year timeline. Okay, and also if you're freezing your eggs in your late 30s, when statistics, which I would quite happily dismiss, say that your eggs should be in decline, then you would be lowering your chance, according to the evidential body in mainstream medicine, by having them much later on, because you'll lower your chances, and you'll lower the chances of just having success at one cycle of treatment. And when I say one cycle, that's using the drugs to stimulate, and whether that's a long protocol or a short protocol, okay, leading on to then one egg collection. So that is called a cycle, from the point of stimulation to the point of collection. So it could be, if you're needing more than one, if you're going to go for more than one cycle, that can be, quite an invasion on your body, really, and on your life. And certainly if you're paying for treatment, it can be very costly. So that's another stressor, and trying to balance this all out, really. But on the other hand, you could say, well, if I freeze my eggs, I'm more than likely to use my frozen eggs in the future, and it gives me options, so that I'm not making decisions based on, I'm still very much in control as a woman, because I know I've got eggs that I can use, and I can use donor sperm if I don't meet someone that I consider that I would want to raise a child with. So it's great, really. So what decisions do you need to make about your eggs? Well, you kind of need to someone would go through a consent form with you, specifying how you would want your eggs to be used. And that on that form, it will say how long you want your eggs to be stored for. And as I said, the standard period is usually about 10 years. It would also include information, so what would happen to you if your eggs were stored, and something happened to you, so you died, unfortunately, or you became unable to make decisions for yourself. So something happened that inhibited your ability to understand or consent to things. Whether the eggs will be used for your own treatment only, or whether you would donate your eggs that you've frozen to someone else for treatment, or whether you would donate them to research or training to embryologists if you didn't want to use them, say, because you met someone and then you tried for a baby and you conceived naturally, so you didn't need to use your eggs, or other conditions that you may have for the use of your eggs. At any time, either before treatment or before the eggs are used in research or training. So even if you had consented for any of the things that I've just mentioned, you can withdraw your consent, and then obviously your eggs would not be used. Eggs that have been frozen and thawed must be fertilised using a fertility treatment called ICSI, as the freezing process that I talked about makes the outer coating around the eggs tougher, which makes it then harder. The sperm wouldn't be able to penetrate naturally under IVF. Question that gets asked: what if I don't use my eggs, or what if I have some left over? So if you don't use your frozen eggs, you have got a number of different options, or you don't want to use your eggs, or you don't need to use your eggs. As I said, you could donate them to research. Research on eggs, research on sperm and embryos is really invaluable because it helps scientists really understand the causes of infertility and develop new treatments. You could donate them to training, as I said. Trainee embryologists might use them to look at different lab techniques, such as fertilising them with sperm in the lab. Or you could choose to donate your eggs to someone else, which is a phenomenal thing to do. It's a wonderful thing to do. And you may be eligible to donate your eggs to someone who very, very much wants a family. Or you would also choose, if you wanted to discard your eggs. Some people would prefer to do that. And eggs that are no longer needed are simply removed from the freezer and allowed to perish naturally. So yeah, it's kind of hopefully given you all a bit of an overview, because I think it's just we're entering a very strange time where there's so much uncertainty, and certainly fertility and infertility is such a silent struggle sometimes, and none of us really know, and certainly none of us women know what's going to happen in terms of our fertility, and until we're really at that point where we want to try for it. So I think it's nice to have these discussions, and there's certainly good cases out there when I had a look of women that have challenged extending the 10-year period for very legitimate reasons. So it's fascinating, and it's good. It's a really good option to consider, because you don't know. So I would say, if you're thinking about it and you think, well, what could I do maybe naturally, or you're interested in more on the holistic side, exploring how you can enhance your fertility prior to treatment or prior to egg collection, then please just drop me a message. Or you're just generally interested in how you can balance hormones. Certainly if you are somebody who suffered with polycystic ovary syndrome or endometriosis, or suffered with polyps, I've looked at a lot of those with some of the clients that I've worked with over 20 years, and certainly has some huge amounts, great success stories really, and case stories, which I've shared a lot in my previous lives. So I hope that this has answered some of the legality. And interestingly enough, just a little point to consider is that if you get your eggs collected, obviously, they are yours. But then as soon as, you get them fertilised, maybe with your partner, they would then need to go on, and the consent then goes over to your other partner. So it's also something really to consider, that having your eggs collected and keeping them as your eggs is certainly definitely worth food for thought, because once those eggs are fertilised with your partner's sperm, and then maybe they're not so sure, they've had a change of heart, they could withdraw their consent, and then you would not be able to use your embryos. So it's just, something to consider, because obviously if they're your eggs, then you still definitely, they're within your control and you make the decisions. And I do think fertility is, it's an exceptional thing, and it's something that you can never take for granted, and you don't really know, I suppose, how fortunate you are if you've been able to have, plan having a family and it's been very successful, because none of us really know the heartache, and it's absolutely such a sad thing, and it's a privilege to kind of share on people's fertility journey, and see the heartache, and it is a roller coaster. So we never know, and it's always that thing of, always be kind and loving. Never take anything for granted, because you never know, as I said, the silent struggle that can be going on around you. So I hope this has been informative. Please do get in touch with me if you have any questions, and I will put a link on here. There's a PDF that's from the HEFA website, which I will click a link to, so that you can download that and have a little bedtime reading if you want. Any questions, just let me know, and I hope this has been informative in terms of, there's definitely food for thought. And if you're somebody who's in their 30s, we can do things to really boost your egg reserve homeopathically and with RTT, to get you and really dish those statistics. Okay, so have a very calm and warm, it's getting a bit chilly, Wednesday evening, and I look forward to my live next week, where we'll be talking more about egg donation, and the following week about sperm donation. So if you've got any questions, start thinking of them, and then just drop them to me, or just join in on the live. Take care.